You remember the exact sentence. You remember where you were standing, the tone of his voice, even the shirt he was wearing when he said it. And when you bring it up later, calmly, without accusation, he looks at you like you've lost your mind. That never happened. You're remembering it wrong. Why do you always do this? For a moment, you actually stop and wonder if he's right. Not because your memory is bad, because the alternative, that someone who loves you is lying to your face with total calm, feels harder to accept than doubting yourself. This is the exact mechanism behind one of the most misunderstood forms of psychological manipulation there is. Most people think gaslighting means telling a lie. It doesn't. Gaslighting is what happens after the lie, when the person keeps denying it with enough confidence, enough consistency, and enough patience that you start editing your own memory to match their version of events. The term comes from a 1938 stage play called Gaslight, later adapted into a well-known film, in which a husband slowly convinces his wife she's losing her mind by dimming the gas-powered lights in their home and then insisting, whenever she notices, that she's imagining it. The lights were never the point. The point was making her stop trusting her own senses. Decades later, psychologists borrowed the name for a real and well-documented pattern of abuse, one that shows up far more often in ordinary households and offices than in dramatic thrillers. Here's what makes it so difficult to spot from the inside. Gaslighting is never one event. It's never a single lie you can point to and say, "There, that's proof." It's a slow accumulation, dozens of small moments where your version of reality gets quietly overwritten, until you can no longer tell which memories are yours and which ones were installed. Picture a workplace. A manager gives verbal instructions in a hallway conversation. No email, no witness. Weeks later, when the project goes sideways, the manager insists they never said anything of the kind and seems genuinely, believably certain about it. The employee starts writing everything down, not to protect a project anymore, but to protect their own sense of what's real. Over months, that employee stops trusting their own judgment, even on decisions that have nothing to do with the manager at all. They ask for reassurance before sending routine emails. They second-guess memories from years earlier that were never in question before. That last detail is the part researchers find most telling. Gaslighting doesn't just distort one memory. It teaches the brain that memory itself is unreliable. And once that lesson sticks, it generalizes far beyond the relationship where it started. It also rarely starts at full intensity. Early on, the denials are small and almost plausible, the kind of thing that could genuinely be a misunderstanding. It's only in hindsight, looking back over months or years, that the pattern becomes visible as a pattern instead of a series of unrelated disagreements. This gradual pace isn't incidental. A large claim delivered on day one would trigger immediate suspicion. A small one, repeated patiently and escalated slowly, gives the mind time to adjust its baseline for what counts as normal. The same way a person can slowly acclimate to a temperature they'd have found unbearable if it changed all at once. The psychology behind why this works traces back to something far more mundane than manipulation: how humans resolve conflicting information. When two things can't both be true, that someone you trust is lying, or that your own memory is wrong, the mind looks for the version that costs less to believe. Psychologist Leon Festinger described this pressure toward resolving inconsistency back in the 1950s. And it turns out that doubting yourself is almost always the cheaper option emotionally, especially when the person contradicting you is someone you love, depend on, or report to. Accusing them of lying threatens the relationship itself. Doubting your own memory threatens nothing but your certainty. So the mind, quietly and without asking permission, picks the option that keeps the relationship intact. This is also why gaslighting tends to work best on people who are thoughtful, self-reflective, and genuinely open to being wrong. It isn't a weakness that makes someone vulnerable to it. It's the very habit of intellectual honesty, the willingness to consider I might be misremembering this, that gets turned into a weapon against them. In relationships, The pattern usually doesn't start with anything as obvious as flat denial. It starts smaller, with trivializing. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. I was only joking. Why can't you take a joke? Each phrase on its own sounds almost reasonable, the kind of thing anyone might say once in an argument. The damage isn't in any single sentence. It's in the repetition, the way it slowly recalibrates what counts as a normal reaction, until real hurt starts to feel like an overreaction and silence starts to feel safer than speaking up. And when the pattern is finally named out loud, when someone finally says, "I think you're gaslighting me," the response is rarely a calm conversation. More often, it flips immediately into disbelief, into hurt, into the accuser suddenly becoming the one who has to defend themselves for even suggesting it. That reversal isn't an accident. It's often the most effective part of the entire pattern, because now the conversation isn't about what happened anymore. It's about how unfair it is to be accused. It's worth pausing here on something the term gets used for incorrectly almost as often as it gets used correctly. Two people remembering an argument differently isn't automatically gaslighting. Memory is naturally imperfect, and honest people misremember details all the time without any intent to control anyone. The distinguishing feature isn't disagreement, it's the pattern underneath it. Does the denial only ever move in one direction? Always toward you being wrong and them being right, and does it happen so consistently that you've started changing your own behavior to avoid triggering it? A single, foggy memory is human. A relationship where your reality is never once allowed to be the accurate one is something else entirely. The same pattern shows up outside romantic relationships too, sometimes in places people don't expect to find it. A parent tells an adult child that a difficult childhood memory simply never happened, delivered with such certainty that the child starts wondering if the whole thing was invented. A close friend insists a hurtful comment was never made, right up until the person hearing it starts pre-apologizing before conversations even begin, just in case they're remembering something wrong again. None of these situations involve romance or power in the traditional sense. They involve the same basic exploit: trust, repetition, and calm delivery, working on a mind that would rather doubt itself than doubt someone it loves. None of this requires a mastermind. That's perhaps the most uncomfortable part of understanding gaslighting. It rarely comes from someone executing a calculated strategy. Far more often, it comes from someone who has simply learned, maybe from their own upbringing, maybe from years of avoiding accountability, that denying reality confidently enough usually makes the problem go away. The behavior gets reinforced not because it was planned, but because it worked the last 10 times. So, what actually protects someone from this, given that willpower alone clearly isn't enough? The research on psychological resilience points to something surprisingly concrete: an external record, not a mental commitment to trust yourself more, which is nearly impossible to sustain under pressure, but something outside your own head that can't be quietly rewritten in the moment. A note written right after the conversation happened, while the memory is still fresh and before any denial has had the chance to plant doubt. It doesn't need to be dramatic or formal. It just needs to exist independently of the next conversation, so that when your memory gets challenged later, you're not relying on memory to defend itself. The second protection is learning to trust your very first reaction to something before any conversation about it takes place. That initial flash of hurt, confusion, or unease is data, gathered before anyone had the chance to talk you out of it. Gaslighting works by inserting itself between the moment something happens and the moment you're allowed to feel certain about it. Shortening that gap is often the single most effective form of defense. The third protection is the hardest to maintain, because it's exactly what gaslighting tends to erode first: outside perspective. A friend, a family member, a therapist, anyone who exists outside the relationship and can reflect your experience back to you without an agenda. Isolation is rarely announced. It shows up as a slow drift away from the people who used to check your reality against theirs, which is precisely why maintaining that outside contact matters more than it might seem in the moment. What makes gaslighting worth understanding isn't just the ability to spot it in someone else. It's the way it reveals something true about all of us, that our sense of reality was never as solid or self-contained as we assumed. It's built, quietly, in conversation with the people we trust most, which means protecting it isn't about becoming more suspicious of everyone around you. It's about keeping one small, stubborn part of your own perception that nobody else gets permission to edit, no matter how calm, confident, or loving the voice trying to rewrite it happens to be. If understanding these patterns changes how you see your own conversations, even a little, that's exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe, because there's a lot more hiding in plain sight than most people ever notice.